Good day, everybody. It's Calxiyn here, and today we will be discussing the She-Ra final, and we will also be talking about RWBY. This video is more for RWBY fans compared to She-Ra fans, so I would say that if you're a RWBY fan, good. If you're a RWBY and She-Ra fan, that would be optimal, because that is basically, that's how we're getting in the meat of what we're talking to today. But if you're just a She-Ra fan, I feel like this video may not be for you, and I'm sorry, but if you're interested in RWBY and the problems that I think RWBY's representation has compared to She-Ra's representation, this may be good for you, because I have seen a lot of, and I know that some of these are just jokes, so I don't want to seem like I'm going after these people, but a couple people did post like, hey, if you're finished She-Ra and you need a new show, watch RWBY. Like, it also has a cat girl and her blonde girlfriend, and I'm like, no, maybe not, and like, we'll talk about that. You guys should subscribe for more RWBY videos, more She-Ra videos. Check out my Patreon to support the channel, and the first conversations of this were really in Twitter and Discord, and so if you guys want to engage with me and help me sort of formulate my thoughts and give your own opinions, like, I feel like that's the best way to engage with me is on Twitter or on Discord, because they really helped me make this video, so thanks guys. I'm bisexual, and the only time that I have seen LGBT representation, right, is in RWBY. Like, that's the first time that I've seen it, right? Not the only time since, like, I've seen, like, a couple other things, but, like, RWBY is where things started for me, and so I thought that Bumblebee was good, you know? A solid B, like an A-, you know? But now, having finished She-Ra, I feel like Bumblebee is a C, and that really makes me feel disillusioned, if that makes sense. And I don't feel like I'm alone, because I've seen other Bumblebee fans talk about this now. I feel like Bumblebee is just not as good as a lot of us thought it was, because a lot of us have not been exposed to, I'm gonna say, like, proper representation. Like, I still think that Bumblebee is on the right track, you know what I mean? Like, it's nice to see an LGBT couple in media regardless, right? But it's the quality of it. Does that make sense? Like, I feel like that a lot of us thought Bumblebee was sort of the pinnacle, if that makes sense. Like, we knew it had problems, but that was as good as we were gonna get, and then She-Ra came along, and we were like, oh no. Like, what we thought is not true, right? And so I want to sort of use Catra and Adora's relationship as a sort of way to pick out, I think, the faults with Bumblebee, if that makes sense. And as I get into the video, you guys will understand. Again, I like Bumblebee. Like, obviously, like, you guys can see that I like Bumblebee. I'm a Bumblebee fan. This is not to attack Bumblebee. I still think that the fact that there is representation in RWBY, you know, is still good, right? But looking at She-Ra, you just realize that it's good to have the representation, but how good are the, you know, the writing of that representation? Does that make sense? And so that is sort of where we're going today. And I know you guys may be thinking, like, wait, Cal, hold on. Like, Catra and Blake and Yang and Adora, like, they're nothing alike. Like, they don't have a lot in common. I think they have some things in common, which I'll talk about, but they don't have a lot in common, which is true. And so I'm not saying to copy and paste She-Ra onto RWBY. That is not gonna work. Like, Yang and Blake do not have to be more like the characters of Catra and Adora. That is not the solution. It's also not the problem. Like, that is not the problem. The problem is that Yang and Blake as individuals don't have the same treatment writing-wise, or like the methods employed to achieve Catra and Adora's relationship as Yang and Blake. As I get into it, you guys will start to understand what I mean, but just to be clear, because a lot of people thought that that is what this video was gonna be, like a one-to-one comparison of, you know, Blake is like this, why can't you be more like Catra? Like, that is not the point. That's also not the problem, as I already said. So what we're gonna be talking about, again, is more of sort of the writing aspect of all this. The way I see it, Blake and Yang have two main problems, and the first problem is that individually, their characters are not necessarily the strongest or the most compelling. And so basically, I'm not saying that everything in their characters are bad, but especially compared to characters like Weiss, or even, like, you guys are gonna be so surprised that I'm saying this, Jean. And, like, some of you, I may have lost you a second, because you guys know that I don't like Jean, but Jean has a very, like, simple, yet kind of compelling sort of, you know, character arc. Like, he sucked, but he wanted to get better, and then he got better, you know what I mean? Like, he put in the work and got better. Like, that is Jean's character, is that he came from a place of sucking ass, but he faked his way into Beacon because he wanted to be a hero. He put in the work to be a hero, and now look at him, I guess. Jean's arc is not over, right? But when you look at something, it's very like A to B. even Blake has a very sort of, a simple sort of idea, if that makes sense. Like, she ran away from Adam and went to Beacon because she didn't want anything to do with the White Fang anymore. She wanted to sort of be, a better person, all that sort of stuff. But then what happens is that Adam comes back into Beacon and she runs away again, but then she goes to confront her fear, and that is her whole sort of arc, and it's very circular because she ran away from Adam and then she comes back from running away to actually confront him this time, right? And it's a very nice little, like, I think that the execution of it isn't that great in certain areas, but like, in theory, like, that is a very good idea. But with Yang's character arc is very confused, and I didn't really realize it until now. But Yang's character arc, I feel like in Volume 2, it was very much about Raven, Summer, and RWBY, right? Like, there were a lot of scenes in Volume 2 that sort of pointed to, like, Raven sort of being involved in that way, if you want to call it that. And even Volume 3, when she talks to Crow and all that sort of stuff. And Yang still has scenes with Raven in Volume 5, but Yang is the victim of Volume 5-itis, and it's very unfortunate that Yang's, like, a part that could have been very important for her character development was included in the worst volume of RWBY. I'm just gonna say it, the worst volume of RWBY, right? The Raven, Summer, RWBY part of Yang's arc that she should have had, right? And that she kind of has, but also kind of doesn't have because she's left out of conversations where Summer is mentioned in Volume 7, right? Like, I feel like that the Raven and Summer part isn't connecting with the Blake and Adam part of her story. I'm not saying that including, Yang in Blake's character arc was a mistake, because I don't think that it was, but they didn't focus enough on Yang's character as an individual, right? And now in Volume 7, you see this problem where it's like Yang and Blake are basically side characters because Yang, for whatever reason, isn't included in conversations about Summer, which is as much her mom as it is RWBY's. I don't understand, right? And then Raven isn't around and Adam's dead. And so you sort of concluded stuff for one character, Blake, I guess, but then now neither of them have anything to do. But we're gonna go through and, like, I'm gonna explain how maybe it could have happened better in previous volumes and what we could do to make them more intertwined and connected and, like, connect these two ideas together so we get, like, a good ship. You know what I mean? Because I think that is something that Catra and Adora really has over Blake and Yang, is that they have a very intertwined sort of relationship from the very beginning, which I get it. Like, it's not going to be the same because they've known each other since they were kids. Blake and Yang aren't like that, right? But Adora and Catra's character arcs are connected with each other. So those are the two things, right? Like, Catra has a very strong character on her own. Again, I'm not going to get into, like, all of She-Ra because that would, we'd be here all day. But Catra and Adora have strong characters on their own, and then when they are connected, they are connected. And that's the problem, that Yang is not connected with Blake in a satisfying way at all. At least I don't think so, especially after watching She-Ra. And I feel like involving Yang and Blake's story was not a mistake, but Yang is missing the same connecting pieces that She-Ra has between its characters. Volume 4 and 5 would have been a great opportunity for Yang to start drawing a comparison between Blake and Raven, alright? Because I think that Yang has some mommy issues, okay? And in a similar way to Catra, Yang should have some abandonment issues. Her biological mother left her as a baby. Her actual mother, Summer, right? Like, Summer died. She spent all this time raising RWBY because Tai Yang was, like, in a depression, and, I've always sort of thought, like, instead of going out to hang with her friends or whatever, she probably had to watch RWBY, right? And all that sort of stuff. Like, she gave up a part of her life for RWBY, and RWBY is the last person to leave her, right? Like, RWBY is the final sort of straw, you could say. And then, Blake obviously left her as well. Weiss was kidnapped, so I don't think that Weiss, really had a choice. And so I feel like that there's a missed opportunity for Yang to have a heart-to-heart with Tai Yang. It specifically involves Raven and Blake. Like, Raven is brought up, but the comparison between them is never made super obvious, even though it's literally right there. I mean, it's obvious to me, thinking about it in hindsight, but it's not brought up in the show, and it's very frustrating to see that messy missed opportunity in RWBY when you see this very clean story in She-Ra. And I think that it would have been really interesting for Yang and Taeyang to directly have some sort of conversation. Like, Yang was brooding a little bit, right? And so, you know, maybe Taeyang, like, tries to cheer her up about, like, her team or something, I don't know, right? And then she could be like, how is what Blake did to me any different than what Mom did to you? I feel like Taeyang, he's a very tough love kind of guy. Like, you know, in his dialogue, you can definitely see that, especially when he's like, yeah, I can see why you lost your arm, bitch. He does not say that. He says something kind of like that, right? And so I feel like he would be almost the same about this too. Like, hey, listen, okay, Raven is XYZ. Blake sounds like a totally different person. You know what I mean, Missy? You don't get to, like, compare your girlfriend problems to, like, the problems with your mom, you know? Because Taeyang already goes into, like, how Raven's personality is, right? And so why could they have not, I don't know why. Like, I feel like that we could get into Taeyang's heartache a little bit and how he felt being left by Raven, and that would lay the foundation for how Yang feels about Blake, because you would have a direct comparison to Raven and Taeyang, who were lovers, right, which is romantic, and then Yang feeling the same way about Blake, you know what I mean? And then you have the added thing of, you know, her feeling like Raven, or I guess Blake is like Raven and Raven is her mother. Like, there's a lot of connecting pieces in there, right? I feel like that Raven and Blake have a lot in common. They make really good foils. Raven was in the tribe, and they were sent to Beacon to learn how to kill people, right? And then she sort of decided, okay, I'm leaving that life, I'm working with Ozpin, he's one of the good guys, right? That's basically what happens, kind of. But then Raven goes back to the tribe. Blake leaves the White Fang, you know, and goes to Beacon for different reasons, right? Obviously, she didn't go to Beacon to learn how to kill people, but she went to Beacon, right? And, you know, Adam confronts her again, and instead of going back like Raven did, she instead confronts her fear. You know what I mean? And, like, the White Fang and the tribe aren't that similar, but there's a Venn diagram of Raven stole stuff and killed people, Blake stole stuff and killed people. They both decided to give up that life, but the difference is that when confronted with fear, Raven went back to the tribe, whereas Blake stood up against Adam, right? Like, Raven is a reflection of the path that Blake could have taken, but did not take. You know what I mean? And I feel like that's so good, right? Like, Blake ran away from Yang, like Raven ran away from Taeyang, and Raven continues to be a coward while Blake went against her own cowardice and confronted her fear head on, which is Adam, right? Like, Raven is what happens when you give in. Blake is what happens when you overcome. Raven would basically be the equivalent of Adam attacking Yang and then Blake being like, well, I guess I can never escape. I'm just gonna go back with him, right? Like, that's what it's sort of like. And that could have been, you know, the reason why Yang was so forgiving to Blake in Volume 6. Like, maybe she did feel like Blake was her mother. But then she realized that, unlike Raven, Blake recognized her flaw and overcame it, right? She came back. And it would have been perfect if they had a scene more pronounced, because Raven leaving again and then Yang coming out of the vault and seeing Blake returning is, like, perfect, because once again, Raven leaves, whereas Blake is the first thing that Yang sees coming back. You understand what I'm saying? I just feel like that would be such a good scene. I don't know. And so, speaking of She-Ra, again, because I feel like that this is relevant, right? All Catra wanted was Adora to choose her, to prioritize her, and maybe Yang could have realized in the end that that is what Blake did, that Blake came back and chose Yang, right? And so I feel like we need, like, more of a pronounced comparison when Raven talks to Yang, when Taeyang talks to Yang. But touching on these things would give a lot more depth to Yang's character, because Yang's character is confused. In my mind, she should still be seeking out the truth about Summer and stuff like that, but she's left out of the Summer-related conversation. Hopefully Raven comes back. Maybe Raven will come back in Volume 8. I don't know, but, you know, I feel like that would give a lot of strength to Yang's character to develop individually, because then Yang's character arc is sort of overcoming her abandonment issues and finally growing into her own person now that she is alone, right? Because, you know, part of, I think, what has affected Yang a lot is having to stay behind, you know, for RWBY, and I feel like they should go into that as well. Like, hey, you know, like, I had to stay behind in RWBY, I had to help her with her homework, I couldn't go out with my friends, right? Like, when Yang is alone in Volume 4 and Volume 5, she should have grown into her own into her own person, and I feel like that would have strengthened Yang as an individual. And if, again, they went over sort of the abandonment issues thing, because I feel like that is part of something that Yang should still be dealing with now. So Yang could have grown a lot as an individual, but that would have been a way for it to also be intertwined with Blake, right? And so that's the first thing, why I think that She-Ra is so much better, and like why it has turned out so much better is because Adora and Catra are always sort of intertwined with each other in a satisfying way, like when they are. And I feel like, again, Blake and Yang could have been intertwined more, and it's mostly on like Yang's side that sort of fails, compared to Blake's side, because Blake compares Yang to Adam in volume 3, I think. She's like, hey, I used to have a partner that, like, he got really angry and he changed as a person when Yang punches Mercury and all that stuff, right? And, I feel like when Blake sees Yang again, especially fighting Adam, Blake realizes that Yang has a better handle on her feelings and her semblance, and that Yang is not like Adam. Like, that is the parallel for Blake, is like she has Yang and she's sort of, like thinking about, well, is Yang just another Adam, or is like, is Adam like over here and Yang's over here? And that it turns out to be the case, right? Because I feel like that hesitation is normal, especially when you're getting into a new romantic relationship with someone and you've been abused. You would sort of question if you see certain behaviors and, be scared about that, right? And so I feel like that Blake's individual conflict is taking down Adam, but the intertwined one is how she sort of feels about Yang and letting that, open up and stuff like that, especially with the conversation that she has with Sun about how she feels about her friends, to stop blaming herself and, like, go ahead and, like, go live your life and all that stuff, right? Like, your friends, like, still love you and they don't think that you, like, ruin their lives and all that stuff. Like, all that stuff, right? So with Blake, it's more of, like, poor execution in some areas, because, again, volume 5, right? And so I feel like that Blake has the right idea for her character, but Yang's character is totally confused. And again, it doesn't need to stop after they defeat Adam, because something that I was thinking about was that these issues could continue in volume 7. Like, for example, right? And I think I said this before. I think I hinted at that I was getting to this. Marrow says that Blake and Yang spend a lot of time together and they should, try to branch out. And not to say that Yang is necessarily clingy, but if we want to get into Yang having abandonment issues, that could be something that connects to Yang's issues, you know what I mean? Like, she wants to spend all her time with Blake because, like Catra, she's sort of afraid that, if Blake goes off, she won't come back, and it's an irrational fear, because Blake has come back and Blake has chosen her, but it's still sort of in there. Another example could be, instead of Weiss throwing the guy in the trash can, right, it could have been Yang tossing a guy in the trash can, right? And, like, Yang has gotten a hold of her temper, but it could be a case, like, this is Yang being overprotective of Blake. Like, why they give these things to Weiss, I'll never know. They're not doing monochrome, even though I have a video about that I'm working on, but anyway. On Blake's side of things, I think Yang and Blake's big moment in volume 7 was telling Robin the truth, and I think that this is great for both characters, and they hinted about Adam in the truck, because there's a comparison to be made, right? Blake has been in the position before, right? Like, in the Happy Huntress's position, but also even in Robin's position, right? And so I feel like Blake is sort of wondering in her head, because apparently they don't want to get into that too much, like, is Robin a good person, or is Robin another Adam? Does she only care about being a hero, being lionized, and all that stuff? Like, they could have explored that concept a little bit more before talking to Robin. That could have been very compelling, because you have Blake and Yang sort of, wondering about that, right? And I feel like that even to some extent we could go back to Torchwick, right? Like, Blake has seen humans take advantage of the faunus for their own gain. Is Robin like that, right? Like, why can't we go into that, Ruby? I don't know, because... And we'll get to this, okay? Because I have some problems with Blake in volume 7. And I feel like that some of these missed opportunities have to do with a lack of planning and foresight. And She-Ra, to me, feels a lot more planned out, with a lot more thought going into each character and their arcs. And I feel like that, I know Catra and Adora are central aspects of the show, and there are a lot of characters in RWBY, and they all need to sort of fight for screen time and all that stuff. But I feel like that in volume 7 especially, they just got tossed aside, even though they are still main characters. Like, I hate the argument of, well, there are 4 of them, they all need to split it up and all that stuff. Like, no, if you're gonna make 4 main characters, you need to make the time. I feel like that's a problem because She-Ra somehow juggles 4 characters, right? They have Bow and Glimmer, Catra and Adora, and I would say that those, you know, more or less are the main, like, heroes, except Catra's a villain, you know, all that stuff, right? Like, there are multiple characters in She-Ra that I feel like got very satisfying endings, even though they are literally, like, side characters. You know what I mean? And so I don't think that that's an excuse either. I just think that they just planned it better. Here's the thing, I feel like in Volume 7, Yang and Blake were sort of tossed aside as main characters, and that the writers no longer know what to do with them because they yeeted the White Fang, and I feel like that this should have been an important season for Blake at least because of Blake being an Atlas, and this problem stems from, again, planning issues compared to something like She-Ra, where all the character arcs are satisfying, and I know that there have been problems with RWBY's production and time constraints and stuff like that, but I feel like that because of not doing the things that they should have done in Volume 4-5, ridden themselves into some corners. What's the excuse in Volume 7 for not including Yang in the conversation about Summer? Like, there comes a point where you can't just accept the excuses about production issues anymore. You know what I mean? Like, we're in Volume 7, and so I feel like that the sort of difference here, another difference between She-Ra and RWBY, is that She-Ra understands that romance is important for the character arcs and development, and it's not just something that exists, right? Like, it should be included in order to expand on and give depth to all of the characters, and this is what Catra and Adora does. Like, their romance gives a lot of depth to their respective characters. It's Catra's love in the final episode that makes Adora consider her own life and her own needs and her own wants. Their love saves the day. Like, Adora has never thought about her own needs until Catra made it a priority. She changes in the relationship because that is what the romance is for. And Blake and Yang have changed a little because of each other, but not to the same extent. And again, Blake and Yang didn't need a redemption arc like Catra because Blake and Yang aren't villains, right? But I feel like that Blake and Yang have hardly changed, or if anything, Blake has regressed. Blake was so passionate and outspoken, especially, like, confronting Ozpin about Faunus issues, and Weiss, and, like, even, like, White Fang brothers, why do you aid this scum, and all that stuff. Like, those are pretty strong words, and her words to Ozpin are strong as well. And you think in Atlas, Blake would care about the Faunus inequality the most, but Blake's passion is non-existent. Like, Blake, I feel like they gave Blake's passion to Nora, and I get it. Like, I like Nora, don't get me wrong, I enjoy Nora, I think that was interesting, but Blake should have been the one to do that, right? Blake is the main character, Nora is not, and I feel like that Blake lost the aspects of her personality that made her so interesting to begin with. Like, she was quiet, but when she spoke, she was passionate, right? And so Yang and Blake together should be giving them more depth and more characterization, not less. That is what a romance is for. But somehow their characters are more unimportant than they were before. Right? And I think that, you know, with Catra, it's a big change. Like, she has changed alignment, right? But she didn't lose her personality. Like, she still has a lot of snark while talking to Glimmer and Bow, right? And, you know, it's more banter than meanness. But with Blake, like, her feelings and her passion has disappeared. Like, it's like she doesn't even care. Like, even though Adam is defeated, she should still be feeling things. And again, that brings me back to Robin. Like, should she not be passionate about Faunus issues and sort of grill Robin a little bit on what exactly she's doing for the Faunus? Because, you know, Robin kind of mentions it, but she doesn't go into it as much as she needs to. At least I don't think so, right? Like, oh, you know, I got the token Faunus and my happy huntresses. Vote for me, everybody. It's just a little concerning that Blake never had anything to say about that, you know? I feel like that is the issue, is that romance needs to bring the best out of both characters. And Blake and Yang's romance does not bring out the best in each other like Catra and Adora's romance does. And especially for Blake, Blake has regressed, and it's hard to fix these problems because, say in Volume 8 they get a clue, right? That maybe Nora shouldn't have been the one to have all these lines and maybe Blake should have had some, right? Like, you know, people will be like, well, why does Blake suddenly care? She didn't care in Volume 7, and honestly, fuck those people. If you realize your mistake, at least fucking fix it, right? But it would be better to recognize and make adjustments than just leave it as it is. And so we have missed opportunities and a fundamental misunderstanding of what romance is supposed to do. At least I think so. Like, Miles and Carrie have said that they aren't comfortable with romance in the past. They said that, right? And they've brought more writers on since, but I think the damage has been done because they weren't comfortable with romance and they didn't utilize romance for its specific purpose, which is to, you know, again, bring the best out of both characters. It's supposed to not necessarily affect the plot, because I don't like when people say that, but it should affect their character arc. Like, romance has a purpose in the story, but with Blake and Yang, and other characters too, like, I feel like Ren and Nora as well. Like, Ren and Nora scares me a little bit, because I'm like, I don't know how Ren and Nora is gonna go here, but Ren and Nora are bringing something out of each other. It's not necessarily the best, but at least it's doing something for both of their characters, right? And so, you know, I think that Ren and Nora are at least kind of on the right track now, but Blake and Yang, I just feel like nothing, you know what I mean? Like, nothing's happening, and I don't know why. I don't get it. And again, it's just looking at Catra and Adora and, like, how much, like, their romance in the last season had an impact on each other, like, in Catra changing and, you know, all of that sort of stuff. Like, I don't know, man. Like, looking at Bumblebee, I'm allergic to bullshit. And I feel like that some of the stuff that has happened with Bumblebee is bullshit, and I don't understand why it's happened this way, you know what I mean? And I hope that things will change. Here's the positive thing. I still think that things can be improved in later volumes, do not get me wrong. I don't think that we're stuck with this. I think giving Blake a little more emotion next volume will be fine. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think that Bumblebee will ever be as good as Catra and Adora because of this reason. On the other hand, RWBY does have more time. Like, She-Ra only had 5 seasons. RWBY is on, technically, if you want to call it 7 seasons, whatever. Right? I'm sure RWBY will go up to, like, a season 10 at the very least, and so we still have time to fix this. Like, don't panic, this can be fixed, but it needs to be fixed, you know what I'm saying? Hunter wanted me to say this, and I do feel like it's important, right? Just because Miles and Carrie are not LGBT does not mean that they don't have good LGBT representation in RWBY, right? Like, you have Saffron and Tara, you have trans characters who are played by trans VAs, and that's incredibly rare, if not, like, I've literally never heard of that. I've never seen anything else do that before, right? And so they have positive representation in RWBY, right? And so my problem with Yang and Blake is not that they are bad LGBT representation, it's that they are in a bad romance. Like, that's it. I don't think that them as individuals, like Blake being bisexual, there has been nothing in RWBY that is like an offensive stereotype, like when it comes to bisexuality. You know what I know the bar is on the floor, like, to not have something insensitive in your show, but in terms of, like, rep, Blake and Yang are not bad rep. There's nothing stereotypical or insensitive, you know, about how they, or awkward even, or cringy about how they are represented as gay people or as gay characters. Does that make sense? And so the problem is not that they're bad representation, but it's the romance that is bad. And I'm sure I could make a video like this about Renora if we really want to look at it. It's just, they are in an LGBT romance like Catra and Adora are, and their romance is not as good as Catra and Adora's romance. Do you guys understand what I mean? And I feel like that it is because She-Ra's showrunner is queer, right? And that this is probably a very, like, personal issue for her, like, the lack of representation in media. And so she wanted to make sure, like, I'm gonna write this bomb-ass romance, like, it's gonna be right, if not perfect, right? And again, I'm not gonna try to make personal assumptions about Miles and Carrie because I don't know who they are, but I think that it's a fair assumption to say that they do not have the same fire lit under their ass as, you know, a queer woman. Like, this is her dream to do this representation, so, you know, people like her and, like, children, right, feel, you know, that they have a character to sort of look up to and that they feel, like, represented and seen and all that stuff. Again, not trying to go into, like her motivation and all that stuff for, like, writing this story, but I feel like that, you know, Hunter mentioned that to me and he wanted me to include that, and I do feel like that is important, right? And I'm not saying that Miles and Carrie aren't passionate or that they don't care, right? I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that, you know, with, it's probably not, they probably don't feel the same way, that they do not have the same underlying passion as she did when trying to make sure that all of this, like, made sense and all this was good and all of it was great and like A+ stuff coming from She-Ra and all that stuff. So yeah, that is basically my vent. This is, again, very different from all the videos that I've done in the past. It is like sweltering in here. I don't know if you guys can tell. I don't know if it's just because like I wasn't mad while writing this script, but the more I talk about it, the more I realize I'm very frustrated by, I guess, all these missed opportunities. And I know that it's easy in hindsight, right? Like, I say that all the time. It's so easy in hindsight to just rewrite something to make it better, but at the same time, it's just frustrating because I'm like, this could have been the Catcher and Adora of RWBY, but they aren't going to be. And I feel like that people should probably not be like, hey, you know, if you want a cat girl and a blonde couple, go watch RWBY, because people are going to be in for a terrible surprise when they find out that RWBY is not as good as She-Ra, right? And they need to level their expectations a little bit. So yeah, that is basically it, guys. I hope that you guys enjoyed this, I guess. Thanks for listening to me, and I will see you guys all later. Bye.